Hello, welcome back. So today we're going to talk about the keyword finally, which is in the code right here. So it's usually associated with a try catch statement, and this is your finally block. So with finally, we spoke a little bit about when programs, you need to allow them to fall gently so that they don't just abruptly stop, and that will be fault-tolerant systems. And by the way, please subscribe so I know to make more videos, and give it a like if you like this video as well. That's really important. Thanks very much. So before I proceed, and also, so you have what's called a fault-tolerant system. So when it falls, you want it to fall gently. And then you also have what's called a resource release code. So here you have finally, and it releases the resources. So there's a thing with programs where it allocates different resources in different blocks. So you have in this particular area, you have resources allocated in the try block, and then if the catch isn't, then the flow of control goes straight to finally. So programs that obtain certain types of resources must return them back to the system to avoid resource leaks, which is one of the most common things that can happen within a program. Garbage collection is automatic within Java usually, but there are certain things that are allocated and then that need to be freed up. So the finally block will execute whether or not an exception is thrown in a corresponding try block. And that's important to know. So it will automatically execute, and the finally block also will execute if a try block exits, but using a return, break, or continue statement, or simply by reaching its closing right brace, which is here. And then the one case in which the finally block will not execute is that if it exits early. So if it uses for instance, the system.exit, but we aren't going to use that just yet. So that's the only thing that it will allow it to exit early. So we have here our finally and our method. So this is called throwing an exception. So the user can throw an exception by themselves, but the finally block, let's go back to finally first. The finally block is optional. If it's present, it's placed at the last, after the last catch. So if we can have multiple catches here, so I can copy this and put in another one afterwards. But because we're trying this and then catching these exceptions, as we've seen in the previous video, so the finally goes after that. It will execute whether or not an exception is thrown in the corresponding try. So it doesn't matter if there's an exception thrown here. If an exception cannot be caught by one of the try block's associated catch handlers, control proceeds to, so it goes try to finally if it's not caught. That's another important part. So a throw statement then can throw any throwable object. So here we have our throw statement, which it's called throwing a statement, and exceptions are rethrown. So this is again down here, an exception is rethrown when a catch block, upon receiving an exception, decides either that it can process that exception or that it can only partially process it. Rethrowing an exception differs from exception handling to another catch then. And when a rethrow occurs, the next enclosing try block detects the rethrown exception that a try block's catch blocks attempt to handle. That's a bundle. So we have here also system.error println, and we also have system.out, and these are two what's called as streams. And they're sequences of bytes. So we differentiate between them because we have our standard output stream, which is our system.out, and then we have our standard error stream, which is our system.error. And that displays the program's errors, and the output streams displays the program's output. So output from these streams can be redirected, so sent somewhere other than the command prompt, such as a file if we want to, which is really useful. So you can output something and send it to a file, let's say on a device. That's really handy. And then you can also hide that from a user. So if you had an Android phone and an Android application, for instance, then you could have any of those sent to a file, and then it would be picked up then in written to a file, and then sent maybe to customer services or something like that, and then onto the developers to fix the error. So, but for simplicity, we're not going to redirect it in this case, because we're just explaining finally at the moment. So the throw statement then, the method throw exception throws an exception. So we have here throw exception, which is our method. So if we start from the beginning, we have our main entry point. It's our floating static void main, as usual, and it's in the class using exceptions. And we have 1 method, 2 method, 3 methods within this class. We have our try, which calls our throw exception method. So if we go back down here, we have a public static void throw exception. If I was to remove static, this is important, I get an error here because I can't have a static to a non-static method reference. So this is where it has to be the same. So if I undo that, there we go. So public static void throw exception throws exception, and we have our throw and our catch here. So static as well, just an important note because somebody asked me about this only this morning. So static, it's an important one. So if you think of a computer game and you have a static keyword, so you have, let's say, a variable that you want to share across multiple objects, then you'd use the keyword static for that variable, because you want, let's say I'm a player and I need 2 other players within this game to know how many bullets that I have, or how many enemies there are there, but you need to share this resource. Then you'd use static because it's only one. You're not creating multiple different. So if I was to have it as a non-static, then I'd have my variable bullets. The other person would also have theirs, and the other person would also have theirs. But if you want to make it a team and a shared resource, then you'd use static. Okay. So we have here then our public static void throw exception and a throws exception, which is part of the java.lang package, which is our group of classes within the Java API, application programming interface, which we have in our Java development kit, which we have already, and that is a subclass form of throwable. So every object that is throwable, you can throw an exception. So here we have our try and our system.out.println. So this comes up on the screen once it's executed, and throw new exception. And then here it catches, and then it re-throws an exception. This is important because you're re-throwing it. And then you have finally executed in throw exception. Now we have another, so we have our catch up here, exception handled in main. And we also have our does not throw exception method, which is not called in any part of our program as a method. But let's have a look at what it looks like. So we have our exception handled by method. Let's bring this down over here. Method throw exception. So we have our method throw exception here. And then finally executed in throw exception, which is here. And then exception handled in main, which is up here. So it's also important to know the program control. So where it's coming from along the way, but also with the re-throwing exceptions, we have Exceptions are rethrown when a catch block, when a catch block upon receiving an exception decides either it can process that exception or that it can only partially process it. So if we look here, exception handled by main, here it is here, it's written as an error, so it's coming up as red. Here is just our standard output stream, which is our series of bytes, and it says method throw exception, and then we have our finally, which is skips our catch and goes to finally, and then the program control goes back to our catch up here. Okay, so we also have another few things that we want to talk about when it comes to our program control, but I will continue that in the next video. So that's it for now. If I click on this as well, because it's highlighted, look at this, it's lovely. If I click here, source not found for throw exception. So we have our system.out print as the standard output, and then we have our finally executed in throw exception, and you can see it's highlighted as a method as well. Okay, so if you've liked the video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel so I know to make more videos. And thanks for watching. See you in the next one. Bye.